Today we're going to be talking about the business use of life cycle assessment. My name is Janet Fogarty, and I am a sustainability engineer at Kohler Company. I've worked at Kohler for I think 13 or 14 years now, and have worked in sustainability for 9. Our program at Kohler has definitely grown pretty substantially over the last several years, and it's really exciting to be a part of a larger company and a sustainability program that's getting so much traction. Last year, Megan and I led a work group that was kind of where all this information stemmed from. And so we're excited to share today all of the results from our work group. So keeping in mind that while Megan and I are presenting, this is kind of the output of many different participants from the industry committee.
And hi everyone, I'm Megan Head. I'm with Georgia Pacific. And just a quick background on myself, I've spent the past, 11 or so years within different companies and industries, from agriculture, consumer goods, office furniture, and now pulp and paper, performing life cycle assessments. And I'm really passionate about using those results and applying it back into the business, especially around improving the performance of products and really thinking about sustainable design. As Jana said, really excited to talk with you all tonight about the work that we've done the past year in the industry committee. So if you move to the next slide, we wanted to give a brief overview of what that industry committee looks like. So our current mission is to provide a forum for industry members to continuously improve product and process sustainability by collaborating on common industry LCA issues, supporting the advancement of LCA methodology and standard practices, sharing professional knowledge, and further developing the business value of LCA. We're actually currently in the process of evolving that mission statement to have a stronger focus on that last part, thinking about how we can really focus on sustainable business outcomes through the application of life cycle assessment and life cycle thinking, as well as looking at how we can broaden our membership base to include design for environment practitioners and be a little bit more, maybe less LCA heavy, and really focus on that life cycle thinking. So on the next slide, we have an overview of the companies in the industry committee. Currently, we have about 25 to 30 different companies, and with such a diverse group of companies represented with different priorities and business needs around LCA, we typically break out into 2 to 3 different work groups at the start of each year. The work groups are formed around topics of interest and relevance, and the members really do have a say in what the topics are through a survey, typically. And I found personally it's a really great way to collaborate and meet others who do similar work and benchmark, share best practices. And so anyone in the industry is welcome to join. We're always looking for new voices and perspectives. So feel free to reach out to Debbie or myself or Jana, and we can connect to the right people to get you involved. So moving into our work group that we focused in last year, we focused on integrating life cycle thinking into the organization with our purpose to create a tool that outlines best practices for integrating life cycle thinking into the culture of an organization. We tried to focus on those small and medium-sized companies, so someone that's just starting out in their journey on life cycle thinking and what are the types of areas they might need to consider. To start in our journey, we first surveyed the entire industry committee to understand what life cycle thinking meant. How would you define it as it relates to your company? Since life cycle thinking can be defined differently for each company and where we're all at with our integration in our different cultures. And so you can imagine we've had many different responses, and this whole word cloud was a result of all the different answers we received. And so Jan and I were going to walk through a few of them with you to show that we did, even though they were a little bit different, there were some similar themes. So first example of a definition is increased emphasis on material economy, energy reduction, and gate-to-grave avoided emissions.
Another one that we received was taking a whole systems approach to problem solving and identifying innovation opportunities that improve environmental footprint at all life cycle stages of our product from design to the end of its life. Think about the supply chain and the customers, the social and environmental impact to the community, not just the economic impacts to the company. One thing I really like about this statement is that it really touches on many, many different, I guess, aspects of life cycle thinking. It's not just that LCA that of the product, but it's the whole life cycle of the product, as well as all the different pieces that could touch it. Like it's saying, think about supply chain and customers, think about the social impacts to the community where the product is made and maybe even where it's used, and the environmental impacts of that community, not just of the product. So life cycle thinking is so much bigger than just life cycle analysis.
Yeah, that is a very all-encompassing definition. And I think a lot of these other ones that we have here are just shorter versions of that, to be honest. But another way to phrase that is considering the environmental and social impacts of products' existence across all points in the life cycle, including creation, use, and disposal, among others.
One other statement we got from someone was, life cycle assessment and design for environment principles help develop, produce, and deliver solutions that meet customer needs while reducing environmental impacts. Another one was taking responsibility for a product's entire existence with thought to the greater system that the product is a part of. What I like about this one is that it kind of thinks also about not just, maybe the one product that you might be working on, but how that product fits into your home or a bigger product that is being used, maybe in a bigger piece of equipment, or it's really just thinking about the whole entire holistic view of how that product's used, not just that one product.
Yeah, and so I think maybe we could stop there. But we got responses from pretty much, we had 25 to 30 different definitions. So we had a pretty good response rate from the entire industry committee, and had very similar themes. So like that holistic approach, be more qualitative in nature, understanding of those impacts and hotspots in a life cycle. So thinking about that whole system. And by taking what was done with these definitions, we thought about how we might be able to actively apply and integrate that life cycle thinking into the organization. And so we developed a roadmap, which was really that tool we discussed as the output of our work group. And this figure was really that tool. And we got to this understand, identify, and transform by using best practices and journeys of the companies in the work group to help create what this roadmap would look like. So starting at the top circle, the first step in the journey includes understanding not only what life cycle thinking is, but who are your target audiences, understanding how you might learn from other companies on how they have integrated life cycle thinking, and what tools or processes might be available to you. From understand, the next step we focused on was identify. We could identify ways that your company is already using life cycle thinking, but maybe a different name. So perhaps your product designers are talking about life cycle thinking, but using the words systems thinking or design thinking. And so how might you identify ways to talk their language? So also understanding your target audiences, and then identifying what are your main areas for improvement. So what are your impacts in your life cycle? And once you've understood how you might be able to apply life cycle thinking and identified those areas you can incorporate into, how are you going to actually apply those learnings and continuously improve and transform your practice? And during the past ACLCA conference in Fort Collins, we presented the work during the industry session. And during the breakout, the companies that were there, most of them identified that they would be at the understand or identify phase in their journey in life cycle thinking, and that no one is quite at the transform area yet, or at least they're not willing to admit it, because we think some companies are there, but just not saying it, being a little humble. So just to dive a little bit deeper into these three areas, first in understand, one way we can understand life cycle thinking is to understand life cycle stages. So using concepts of LCA at a more high level, more qualitative questions, a little bit more simple. So some examples, thinking about end of life. Do you have an understanding of the durability of your product, or if it's easy to repair? Have you considered how material choice and production can impact the end of life of your product? So really thinking about where those trade-offs might exist. And so by understanding where you're at each life cycle stage, you can better understand risks, rewards, and trade-offs. And then the probably biggest aspects that we discussed in our work group last year was around life cycle thinking and its connection to business value. And so we have a few short examples of that before we get into a little bit more detailed examples from different companies. So I don't know, Jenna, if you want to go through some of these.
Sure. So these examples were just different ones that we received from other people in the work group that we had last year. And one of them was that a level of reuse of 20 to 40% in the environmental footprint of steel leverages the position of steel in material decision making. So, just being able to use a recycled material such as metals or glass or that kind of thing demonstrates, the importance of collaboration of LCA experts, marketing, commercial teams, customers, kind of all working together and realizing that there's quite a bit of value in using recycled materials. And obviously that's, been around for a long time, and we've been, it's common, especially for metals, but there is a lot of value in using repurposed or recycled materials, not just the common ones, but other ones as well. And people are really starting to delve into what those might be. One example I know that has been talked about from the foundry industry, which is kind of my previous life, is that there's material that comes off the kind of called slag. It comes off the top of a furnace when you're melting the metal, and that typically would just go into the landfill. But I know some foundries were able to find ways to repurpose that material and remelt it down and have it add value into their process. And one other example we received was a little bit more high level, but just saying that using an LCA-based approach benefited the organizer in terms of brand value and investor interest, offers the best and holistic understanding of the implications of every step in the operation, in turn leading to heightened preparedness for new regulations and dampening of effects of variation in raw material quality. So, these are just kind of high-level statements of life cycle thinking and how it can add value, but there are many, many examples of that are more specific, that are really interesting to learn about. And one, I guess, kind of plug for the work groups this year is that I know both of the work groups from the industry committee are doing quite a bit of example gathering from different companies within within the industry, because I feel like a lot of times that is one of the best ways for people to learn and gain ideas for themselves, is to kind of see what other companies have done and what's worked for them and maybe what hasn't worked for them, and to try to add value to their own LCA work that they're doing. Is there anything you wanted to add to that, Megan, or should we keep moving?
Yeah, that sounds great. Yeah, the 2 work groups, just to give a sense of what we're working on this year, are focused around DFE, Design for Environment Best Practices, and then one that Jan is leading again around communication. Very high level, but those are the 2 that we're focused on this year.
So within the identify and transform stages of the roadmap that Megan was talking about a little bit ago, there are, knowing and learning from others helps us transform our program and develop our programs further. We do have, going forward within the next little while, we do have a small sampling of some of the learnings from member companies, sharing their ideas and successes. We also have some interesting things that we have found to be successful. So cross-functional workshops, I think almost every single company that put themselves in that identify or transform type place said that making sure that you're working cross-functionally is really key to making sure you're seeing the whole picture. So with a new product development, getting involved early in the design process is really important. At Kohler, we always say that 80% of a product's environmental footprint is already determined once that product has kind of been designed. So it's much simpler to try to find ways to make it a more sustainable product, or to have an interesting environmental reduction type story if you can get involved early in the design process. Optimizing the supply chain. Sometimes with some companies I know, looking at materials and supply chain can be an easy place to look if you're more supply chain heavy. Other times, it seems really daunting and complicated, depending on what type of work that you do. But there's obviously, the materials and the supply chain and the transportation of those materials is always a pretty significant part of any product. So something that is important to start identifying as you're thinking about life cycle thinking within your process. Manufacturing partnerships, something that this is something that Kohler that we've really pushed hard with, is spending a lot of time with our manufacturing facilities and helping them find, understand, optimize where they might have hot spots, where there might be extra energy going into a product, where there might be ways that we can lower the environmental footprint or improve the quality of a product, because that in turn will lower the environmental footprint as well in an area that you don't always think about, especially if the manufacturing isn't done on site. So many times that manufacturing phase is not at the same place where the new product development team is. And so it's a little bit trickier to spend some time in that actual manufacturing plant or at the operations, headquarters to understand really where a lot of those impacts are. But it's a pretty important piece if you really want to be able to make a difference. There's a lot of different tools that different companies have developed for teams to use, from different high-level screening, brainstorming type tools that can sometimes be really, fun and interesting, especially when you're really getting to think really creatively about ways that you might be able to make a product or its materials more sustainable. Sometimes, you come up with some really crazy ideas, but those definitely can be useful, even though they're not always something that we normally would think about unless we really step outside of our normal realm. And one example of a tool that we do use at Kohler that we like is we call it something with either with toothbrushes or with different kitchen accessories, baking accessories. And the reason we use those is because those are products that Kohler doesn't make. We don't make toothbrushes. And so looking at redesigning a toothbrush or a dental floss or different things like that allows our teams within our new product development area or within marketing to really think differently about design for environment, because you're not thinking about it in the rut that you're in day after day. It really is interesting to see how people step outside of their normal thinking when they are looking at something that they don't necessarily know as much about. They're not an expert at it. They don't have all these things we can't do with this because of this. They're just thinking, what if we could do this? And so that's something we really found to be successful, as well as really zoomed in tools to drive lifecycle thinking down to specifics for the product or the customer and how that might be used. And then the really deep dive is obviously LCA. Most people are familiar with LCA results, but not necessarily, how to put together an LCA. And not the topic of this webinar, but doing that deep dive and really putting together an LCA that draws in enough detail when it's being assembled can really be useful later on as you're trying to understand where those hot spots are. So, and then some of the questions that we have asked of companies when they're at that identify phase to try to move forward are, how does your company use lifecycle thinking? Are there lifecycle thinking methods that your company might be missing out on? And possibly doing like a gap analysis between, where you currently are and where you'd like to be in the future. And as far as the transform portion, basically, if you're there, then those best practices and you're able to apply those from within, from external sources. You're really able to share where you're at. You're able to continuously improve those methods and the performance of your life cycle thinking, and mentor or influence others on it. And one way that we've tried to get to do that a little bit with everyone that we're sharing all these life cycle thinking learnings from is the business use of life cycle thinking flyers that we created. So these can be found, a more kind of zoomed in version of them, the actual PDF, on the right side of your screen. There's a little spot that says handouts right below where the attendees are, and all of the lifecycle thinking flyers that were created, there's 4 of them, can be downloaded right from there. They will be up on the website in the next few weeks to a month, I believe. But these, we really tried to take all of the learnings that we had and the different ways that lifecycle thinking can support your entire business, and kind of put them down into a few different summarized flyers so that you're able to use those when you're maybe sharing how lifecycle thinking can benefit your business, to a management team, to a group of engineers. There's many different audiences that you might be able to use that with, but we're hopeful that you'll find some bit of knowledge within one or many of these flyers that you're able to use and bring back to your business.
And now we're going to move into more of the example section of our discussion today. And a lot of these examples we tried to tie into those business value flyers. So there should be a little bit of a statement. Our hope was to make those flyers a little bit interactive on the website, so you could click in and see how different companies are applying life cycle thinking at different parts of their business or to different audiences. So hopefully that can still be something that's achieved. So the first example we have is from Steelcase and Qantas. So Steelcase worked with Qantas to develop a customized version of the Lifecycle Perception board game. The game provides a hands-on learning opportunity to explain everything it takes to make a product, use it, and dispose of it, and describes the impacts throughout the life cycle. It really demonstrates the perceptions in a product life cycle impact and helps build literacy around LCA and life cycle thinking. So what happens is the participants will first create the life cycle of a product, and to Jana's point, maybe best to use something that your company doesn't use. The first time that Steelcase did this game, we used shampoo, I think, and coffee. So very different than office furniture, very different supply chains, very different impacts across the life cycle, but can provide a step out of your day-to-day thinking. So once that life cycle is created, you then allocate chips around the board and onto those different life cycle stages to represent impacts such as carbon, water, energy, could be cost as well. And then the results from the actual life cycle assessment study are revealed to the participants, and they can see how well their perceptions matched what the science had showed. And showing that full life cycle really, to me, helps to show that the company's manufacturing or logistics or those more tangible, more direct activities that people are more accustomed to, they may not be the most impactful part of the product life. And again, as Jana mentioned, it was really most useful when we used it with a product development team early in the design phase and included a brainstorming session on how we might think about those perceptions and use that to improve the performance, the sustainability performance of the products or the project that we're actually working on. So that was a really good tool, and that we kind of we took what Qantas had done and made a Steelcase specific version. The next example we have for you is from Georgia Pacific. So at Georgia Pacific, a study was done comparing single-use napkins to reusable cloth napkins. The study started as a screening LCA, so one of those tools that we have in our toolbox, and it was started about 2 to 3 years before the product actually launched. So I'd call that very early in the design process. And the purpose of that screening LCA was to understand the impacts over the life cycle to help give directional guidance to the development team. Different raw materials were considered and could be added into the study to identify how the materials for the single-use napkin could impact the overall results and where the hotspots in those life cycles occurred. The environmental impacts could be considered early in the process and could be considered along with other product attributes that you might consider, like performance and cost. One other thing to say about this study was that the business did decide to move forward with a full LCA with the goal of external communications, which this is a snapshot of what that external communication looks like. It was also presented through the Mother Nature Network, and the overall results showed that focusing on the full life cycle showed that single-use napkins do have certain environmental advantages over reusable restaurant napkins. So it just shows those different tools that we might have in our toolbox and how we can apply that life cycle thinking and life cycle assessment really early on to help show where we might be able to leverage for external communications.
And they did take those results and kind of put them into a short little video, which is actually really interesting. So I can't remember, was it the website that's on? That's a public available.
Yeah, that's on the Mother Nature Network.
Mother Nature Network, okay. Yeah, so if anyone's curious, that it's definitely worth the 2 or 3 minutes that it is to watch. It's very well done. So at Kohler in our Design for Environment program, we have worked with our new product development teams globally to try to integrate design for environment or sustainable design And one of the ways we've done that that we found to be the most successful is to kind of split up the DFE thinking into 9 different strategies. They're tied kind of to different phases of a product life cycle. And using this wheel, the teams can kind of hopefully design products that are more environmentally favorable and give the consumer a better, more sustainable choice. The nice thing about this wheel is that it kind of allows you to think about, many different things you might not necessarily always think about when you're designing a product, and identify the most relevant strategies for your specific project that you're working on. A couple of each in the version that we work with our teams on, there's 4 to 10 questions for each of the strategies that they can use during kind of a brainstorming session at the beginning of their project to hopefully help them just think about different ways that they can hopefully reduce the impact of their product. And a couple examples of those are, so could we lease this product like we might lease a car? By doing that, then at the end of a product's life, maybe the consumer would be more likely to give it back to the manufacturer, and then maybe we could make a more of a circular economy type loop for this product, rather than the consumer having to come up with a way to do something with it at the end of its life. Another question that we like to focus on with teams are, can we push proactive servicing as a part of our product offering? So maybe that use or longevity strategy, thinking about, if you only have to buy one product instead of 2 or 3, because you're able to service it differently, or maybe do a small replacement part, then that's a pretty big impact reduction typically. Or maybe sending out product instructions that sort of are efficiency settings, where those efficiency settings are kind of the standard. So rather than letting the consumer program something, maybe the pre-programmed way that it's sent out is a more efficient setting, and maybe it's not the setting that everyone would necessarily always choose eventually, but maybe you can get used to doing that, using it that way if that's how you receive it. So those are just a couple of questions. We have maybe 100 that are within this wheel that we use, but we have definitely found it to be helpful when we're working with teams to just kind of get the ball rolling, get them thinking about different options for hopefully designing products that are more gracious to the consumer, and also have a lower footprint in some part of their life cycle. One other thing that we've done to help give examples to teams, and just to help get people's brains kind of thinking about different ideas and ways they can see environmental savings and environmental reduction for projects, is we've made cards, physical paper cards, for each of the different innovation strategies, and there are numerous examples for each of the different strategies that help share ideas for ways that different products have been designed. So there's some color products in there. There's definitely a lot of non-color products in there, because there's a lot of companies who've done really great things in different ways that they've designed products. And so as you can kind of see in this card, we talked about, number 6 for our wheel was product use. And then in number 6, there's 6 or 7 questions that can be asked. So question 6.2 is about reducing energy requirements, and are there ways to decrease energy use while providing the needed function? And this example of a Dyson fan is how they kind of did that. And So the cards really are great for people to even just bring a handful back to their desk and flip through them, and maybe something will spark an idea for something that they can bring back as they're working on designing or improving products that Kohler is working on. And we have mentioned a few times our industry work groups. The work group that I'm leading this year is about LCA communications and how to demonstrate value and drive understanding of LCA results. I really like this infographic because it just has a ton of detail in a really unique way. Kind of grabs your attention. I feel like you could see that as something in a magazine, and you might think, oh, this is just an advertisement, but I would probably be willing, at least myself, because I'm interested in this kind of thing, to take a couple minutes and look at what it's trying to tell me. But within that industry work group this year, we're putting together a lot of different case studies and examples, basically kind of do's and don'ts based on feedback from the different members of the teams and other successful business leaders who have shared LCA results in their organization and what works for them, what hasn't worked, kind of just, again, best practices that we can hopefully share with all of you at the conference. But we kind of keep coming back to in our group that so many of us are engineers and sometimes find it hard to communicate in a way that the rest of the world can find interesting, because to us, what we like to talk about is not, it's kind of a little bit nerdy sometimes to other people. So we're trying to think about making sure that we have, pictures and graphics and examples that are interesting, simple, intriguing, and quickly demonstrate the life cycle results that are driving the product footprint, and get people thinking about that. Another example that is a lot of times an easy one to at least delve into a little is the supply chain. This example is from a kind of small to medium-sized company, and how they were able to use lifecycle management, more specifically LCA, to kind of give them a different lens and insight into how they made some decisions with their supply chain, and save quite a bit of money with freight savings every year, and also quite a bit of energy and resource savings as well. It's also kind of a neat way that they use the graphics. There's definitely a lot of really interesting ways out there that I've seen as I've been researching a little more, that companies are getting a little more creative with how they're sharing their stories that they're telling, because they want other people to realize that they're trying to make a difference in the world, and lifecycle thinking is definitely starting to be more commonplace, at least than it was, a few years ago. And freight is obviously a really big way that can be done, especially if you think about how much, even just one little Sharpie, from where it gets manufactured to where it gets used to it getting thrown away, how many miles does that, one writing utensil really make in its life? And if you can transport it, in a train or more compactly packaging it, will that then it's in theory traveling less, miles, because it's sharing all those miles with so many other products. So just kind of thinking about all those different things is a really important part of the process. And this is the last slide that we have today. Second to last slide that we have today. This one is all BASF. They were a big part of our work group last year, and I really love these 3 flyers or advertisements that they had last year, because I think that they demonstrate life cycle thinking and in a very interesting and graphically pleasing type way. Just a great example of how to show what you're working on and how life cycle thinking can help set you apart. With the example on the left, it's talking about, a recent polyester plant wastewater reduction project reduced environmental impact savings of 250 metric tons of CO2 emissions annually, and then kind of tying that back into vehicles. So that's equivalent to the annual greenhouse gas emissions from over 52 passenger vehicles. That really brings it home for people to see and understand how, one pretty simple project can have such a huge impact from a company, prioritizing life cycle thinking. And obviously it's a great story for how that they, saved emissions, but I'm sure that also had a substantial cost savings as well. Sometimes, we think that making the sustainable choice costs more money, but many times it has a pretty significant business savings as well. And the last slide that we have today is a graphic from the UN Environment book that was released not too long ago, guidelines for providing product sustainability information by UN Environment. And if you haven't seen that PDF, it's excellent. I highly recommend it. Anyone that's probably on this call is probably interested in taking a look at it. It's got a lot of really good information for any company that's hoping to keep pushing sustainability within them. But the way that they've defined life cycle thinking is considering the whole product life cycle means that sustainability impacts are assessed for every stage of a product's life, from resource extraction to disposal. When defining the sustainability information to be provided to the consumer, this avoids that burden shifting occurs from one stage to another. And really just kind of driving home that it matters for the whole life cycle of the product. And I like that they also kind of tied in not only the environmental impact, but also the social impact, and then also the economic impact.